Hi everyone, welcome to Foresight's Intelligent Corporation Group. Thank you so much for joining, and it's good to see so many people here in the Zoom room that also joined our cryptography security AI workshop on Monday and Tuesday. So thanks for coming into that. And there was quite a big overlap also from folks that had recently applied to a new kind of like funding coordination scheme launched by Nonlinear, and we have Kat here today. And you've been quite like instrumental in kickstarting this entire process. And I won't assume, I guess, like too much background knowledge from people who are joining here today, but I do know that there's a few familiar faces that at least know a little bit about the program. So just about like how this conversation will likely run, we're going to do like a few intro questions and so forth. And then if you already want to start collecting your questions in the chat, that would be wonderful. And at the end, we hope to have a considerate amount of time to take Q&A with everyone. Okay, awesome. So, Kat, could you perhaps briefly describe a little bit your background in AI safety, like, and perhaps like how you came into being interested in it, and then also how it led you into your current role and the focus that you currently have with Nonlinear?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I describe myself as like a serial charity entrepreneur. I just go around, I start things. And so Nonlinear is the first thing I started in AI safety. Before that, I was involved more in global poverty and animal rights stuff. So I started a few charities there, including one, the big thing that happened there was that I started a charity doing vaccinations in India. And a big claim to fame there is that at one point, GiveWell estimated that we were as cost effective as AMF, which is pretty cool in that weird, very small niche circle. And then after that, co-founded Charity Entrepreneurship, which is an incubator for charities in the animal rights and poverty space. And then now I'm in AI safety, being involved since 2020, basically convinced by the arguments. And it was like, the big thing that changed for me is before I was like really skeptical. I was like, this is sci-fi. I had all the regular arguments. This is sci-fi. We're trying to like figure out like overpopulation on Mars. And then the big thing that changed for me was I realized I am not actually that confident in those long timelines. Like it only has to be like, there has to be a high enough probability that it happens soon that it's like worth working on. And then now it's like even worse. I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, what Nonlinear does generally is the way I try and describe it is like, if I have like only a sentence, I say we're an incubator for AI safety projects and organizations. If I have longer, what I say is that like, we do prioritization work where we try and find the highest leverage ideas that need to be doing where there's like a gap. And then we catalyze those. And one of the ways we can do that is incubating, but that can also be like doing it ourselves if it's a sort of thing that can be done passively in the background. A big thing that I'm a big fan of is, so there's this idea of passive income, which is like where like versus active income. Active income, go in, make money each day, and you have to put in work. And then passive income is where like you can put in an initial amount of effort and then like it continues like generating income in the background. And for me, like I'm trying to generate passive impact. Like this is my big thing. I'm trying to make it so we have impact that is going in the background and I just have a million passive impact streams. But unfortunately, altruism, there is no diminishing returns. So I don't actually have a 4-hour work week. I still work a very large amount of time, but I have way more impact. So anyway, so that's one of the things is like, we're trying to find passive impact streams that's either we can do it ourselves if we think that it can just run relatively low cost in the background. And if not, then what we do is we try and catalyze that for other people to do. So either inspire like existing organizations or like entrepreneurs and stuff to like start things and we like help them and like get it off the ground. So yeah, and so we've been doing like a whole bunch of different things like that in the AI safety space. We mostly focus on the meta level. So like we're not doing any direct work ourselves in terms of trying to like actually do technical research. My specialty is much more in just like, how do we get things from 0 to 1? I'm really good at that. And then other people can get it from 1 to 10 because that's a different skill set. So yeah, anyways, that's like a little bit of my background.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people here probably also know the Nonlinear library, which has become like, I think a pretty good, just like news source for like a few of the really good like articles that you can listen to a podcast style now. And it's, I think, yeah, certainly has changed or greatly impacted like my just uptake on what's happening. And you do a variety of different programs and they're all listed on the website that I just shared here, but perhaps more recently, and maybe we can discuss the other ones also in case we do have time for it. But more recently, really started the Nonlinear network. And so I'm, yeah, super curious just what got you like thinking about it, what got you started into like actually pursuing this. I remember, I think I talked to Emerson about it at EAG earlier this year, and he was mentioning something like that in the making, but then it's just really nice to see that you just actually went ahead and did it. So could you perhaps just describe, what it is and how people were already benefiting from it?
Yeah. So the idea behind the Nonlinear network came from, I'm not sure if you guys heard that FTX exploded last November. And so when that happened, we set up this like emergency fund. We're like, oh, hey, there's going to be some people who need funding really fast who've been affected by this. They're counting on TX. And so we set up this emergency fund just to like tide people over, right? And then what happened, we were just intending to give some of our own, like from our own budget. We're like, okay, like we'll just give some small amount that will really help. That'll make a really big difference for a few people. But then a whole bunch of people, like this is very much like a natural disaster, but in the EA space. And so all these people came together to help. And like people said, hey, I want to donate. I want to help. And we're like, sure. And what most donors do, what most of the funders that I know, like the big funders, if like a donor comes up and says, hey, I want to like look up stuff, they say, okay, we'll send you a few applications that we think that you might like, right? And this just adds like a huge like blocker to like how many things can get funded, because like then they have to spend the time getting to understand the funder, then understand all the applications, send just the ones, like that's like a lot of labor. So they just don't do it very much. And I was just like, I don't know, I'll just ask all the applicants, hey, can we share your applications with potentially interested funders? In unsurprising news, pretty much everybody said yes. And nobody actually said no. I'm pretty sure the only people who didn't say yes, it was just because like we went to spam or something. So, and then the people who said yes, and we shared their application, we just shared like a spreadsheet with the funders, like they just got way more funding. And because like other funders wanted to fund different things than us, right? And they had more money and all that sort of stuff. And that just went really well. Like out of all of the donations that came from that, only 10% came from us. And the rest of the 90% came from like, these other funders. And so I was like, well, that worked really well. And my response, whenever something works really well, I'm like, how do we replicate that? That seems good. And so we're like, okay, and that's like the Nonlinear network was born. So we're like, okay, well, we're just going to make it so that like when people apply to this thing, it'll just be shared with a bunch of funders. And it's like basic math. If you share it with more people, like it's more likely that one of them is going to say yes. And so this will just lead to like more things getting funded. So from the applicant's perspective, this is really good because then you have a higher chance of getting funded. And then from the funder's perspective, it's really good because then instead of just having to like bump around and wait for somebody to send you an application or something, like you can just actually see all of them and like much more easily compare. You can actually see, oh, hey, like I'm interested in interventions that give us more time. Let's like slow down capabilities. And you can just find all the ones that are doing that. Or if you're into meta stuff or whatever, right? So it's good on both sides. And then also I think a really important thing as well, like one of the things I definitely have is in terms of one of my like world models, maybe values as well, is like having a lot more decentralization. I think like right now, like the current model of like how if you just send things that like, imagine I was like, okay, I'm just going to share the things that I think are good with other like funders, right? Then it's all going through the filter of Kat's values and world models. And like, you might not share my values. You probably don't share my world model. We probably have totally different ones. And I'm not sure that mine's correct. And so like, it just leads to like less good, like things happening. And so that's one of the other things I really like about this is it basically just leads to like us being able to have a lot more stuff happening. And then also it's more likely to be correct. I think that even if you're super into like epistemic modesty, this idea of, oh, hey, you should look at what are the things that like, how do I describe epistemic modesty? It's like you recognize that you're just one truth-seeking like being in the world, right? And you have no particular reason to think that your conclusions are better than your like epistemic peers. Like people have similarly good like intelligence, epistemics and stuff like that. And so then if people disagree with you, then you should like update as much like they're as much as like you or something. And even if you totally buy that, which I have like very nuanced views, but even if you totally buy that, you should not like have it be that just a few people are making the decisions, right? Right now, there's like just a very small number of funders. It's basically us have EA funds, OpenPhil, and like OpenPhil and EA funds are ridiculously correlated. They're like very similar. A lot of it's the same people. And we don't want to bank the entire world on just like a handful of people's ideas of what's good or bad. And so that's like another thing that I think is like good about the network.
Yeah. So you basically set up this kind of like platform really where on the one hand, projects could apply and on the other hand, funders could apply and kind of created this kind of like coordination mechanism really like between these kind of like two sets of people. And in terms of specific outcomes for you, did you have a number of expected like applications going in and was that exceeded or in terms of as an organizer of this, how did you think it went?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So we got way more applications than we thought we were going to get. Around 450, which was like quite a lot. And we got around like 70 funders, of which so far like around 30 have donated. But I think so in terms of how it went, I feel like it didn't go as well as I thought, but I also am like definitely one of those people who's, oh my God, we're going to move like $10 million or something. And so it did not do that. So not this time, maybe next time. But yeah, that's how it's gone so far. And actually right now, it's funny because just today we're just like rethinking thinking a whole bunch of the strategy. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, but it went well enough that we're going to do another round, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, I certainly really love that you could kind of like decide on specific focus areas that you wanted to see or that you wanted to apply in. I think that was really useful. And also that on the back end, you also had you were able to access the reviews of other reviewers as well. And so you had a little bit of more of a kind of like a collaborative red team or something going on, which I thought was quite interesting. And I thought was like pretty well organized. And yeah, so I'm really excited for next round. And for next round, do you have any concrete plans or ideas or anything like that? Or is it still under discussion?
Yeah. So it's still very much in discussion. So like the super tentative thing is to do another round in like around Christmas season, because that was like a big thing. Is just realizing that lots of people give around that time. And so that's like a big thing. But right now we're like still discussing in the team. I'm like on the team that I think we should just have this like continuously going all year round and have a whole bunch of different like programs essentially going through it, right? So we can have like donor circles where people who have similar donation interests can get together, or we can have matching like marathons and stuff like that, or whatever. And then there's like so that's like kind of, I'm going to be worse at like Steelman on the other side. Anyways, the other side is, we should like keep it like shorter periods so that like really encourages people to like give and do stuff, because otherwise like people won't do anything if you don't give them like deadlines and stuff. So, but I think we can just give them deadlines with like matching and stuff. So I don't know, but it's still very much an open. We don't really know is the actual answer.
Yeah, I love the idea of donor circles. I think it's almost something that could naturally fall out of this, because if people like kind of like toggle according to specific categories, then they already kind of like share specific interests in these areas. And I think oftentimes like when you're considering funding something, I think it definitely helps if another person's also stepping in, and you can kind of share the load. You make this project perhaps not really like your hobby project or your pet project, but like it's a little bit more collaborative. So I think that would work really well. Also love the idea of doing another one like around perhaps like even Thanksgiving, Giving Tuesday or something. That sounds pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, even though at that point probably like everyone's fundraising, so I'm not sure. But I think it was useful that it happened now, because there's so many new projects now that we're looking for funding, and also so many more people just recently got pretty worried about the fields, that I think it was a really good time to do this now. Like it came right at the complete time.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, if you want to share anything else.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, so one thing, I know this is a Q&A for me, but one thing I'd be really curious about is, so one thing we're considering is whether to make future rounds public or not. So like right now it's, we have to apply to be a funder. But what if instead we basically make this this is like the Amazon of AI safety. If you want to donate in AI safety, you can go here and you can just see everything that's available where you can donate. And it's like you can search and everything. We need to have Amazon basics where it's, I don't have lots of time to think about this. This is the stuff that's pretty reliable and rated well or something. And yeah, so I wouldn't be like, I don't know how this is structured specifically if that would work, but like I would love to hear people's thoughts on whether they think it would be good, like whether they would want to apply if they knew it was going to be public and like that sort of stuff. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I think that's definitely a question that we should also give to participants once we do the kind of like back and forth Q&A. So if anyone here feels interested in chiming in on this, please already say so in the chat. And well, I guess there's what is it called? The future funding list. Do you know that list? It's basically, it lists a bunch of funders. It lists a bunch of funders. And I think it's interesting, but it's the opposite way around. But it lists a bunch of funders, what they're interested in, like which topics they're in and so forth, so that people can easier contact them. But I think the other way around would also be potentially interesting. I think, David, if you already want to comment on this, please feel free to do it now.
Yeah. So I got my immediate comment on making it public is there are a lot of people who are not at all interested in funding AI safety that dislike AI safety. And I really don't like the idea of doing this. The other issue I have is, in an application, there's a lot of stuff I can write that like very much shouldn't be public, like how much we would be planning to offer people and what our range, like there's a bunch of stuff that is useful for funders that isn't necessarily supposed to be public. So if it was public by default, there's a lot that like couldn't be said. The flip side is lots of people, there's a lot of stuff that you could like, these things can't be public.
Yeah. I was thinking like for the public private thing is having some sort of thing where it's, here's like the section where you put the stuff that's public. And then you can have like a section that's private for just, that stuff that's like more so that way. Yeah, it is interesting about like the AI safety, like the people who really don't like us, that could actually be like a lot of surface area for criticism. Although I do think, I don't know, I'll think about this more. But one thing that definitely comes to mind is these people are like sufficiently motivated, like they're just going to say bad things anyways. And so it could just be like one of those things where it's like, although you would also imagine having some sort of just like degrees of privacy. And so like some people are like, oh, hey, I only want to apply if everything's private. And then it only goes into the private thing. And then they're like less likely to get donations, but it probably actually wouldn't reduce it tons, right? And then there's like the people who are like, okay, I'm willing to do this publicly and take the risk that maybe somebody is super critical of me online or something. And that would just be a trade-off that people can make on their own or something.
I do wonder, in the previous round, how many of the applicants were like well-known orgs that were looking for additional funding or existing things versus individuals that were looking for 6 months of funding to do something versus like what was the distribution there?
I honestly can't say. I feel like it was like it felt, well, actually, I was about to say it felt like representative, but how would I actually know that? It felt like a pretty even mix. It was like definitely like a ton of really, it's like power law where like most of the like big well-known ones are like bigger. And so there's only one application for like a bunch of people there. So I feel like I have this like vibe that it was more smaller applications, but there were plenty of like bigger orgs, but they were just going to be almost by default like a smaller number of the total pool.
Yeah, I would also agree that I certainly saw a lot of names that I've never heard before on there, which was really cool. And also like very reasonable asking amounts. So I think it was actually pretty surprising, I think, to me, that I definitely found people that I think I would have never otherwise even had just had the breadth to find. Yeah, I'm super curious if you have any learnings for like potential, like for people that have already applied or something. Is there anything that, because I think you did have a few feedback sessions with that funded. I wonder if you're also doing that with people that applied, or do you have any learnings for folks that have applied in terms of what may be done differently next time? Or
Interesting. Yeah. So, okay. So for applicants, what are you saying? What have I learned about how to help applicants, or is it more like how to help applicants like be better next time around?
Yeah, I mean, I think both. We have a few applicants, I think, here in the call, but also like in general, I'm assuming that this is also pretty useful for folks that have applied in the previous round. So like any learnings that you have that would help applicants like do a better application next time or something, that would be really useful, I think.
Yeah. So a few things for fundraising I think are really good. One is that, I mean, there's like super simple things that you can do to make your application look way more professional and way more like trustworthy. Just like use like Google templates to like just make it look pretty. And it's, this shouldn't matter. This really shouldn't, but it totally does, right? I still remember once I got an application. This is back when I was running a charity in India, and I got an application where somebody had written it out like handwritten on paper, and I was like, like I didn't even read it, so I was just like, this is oof, right? And nobody was doing that, but you can do that kind of like equivalent, right? Where it's just, and like with the templates, it's just so easy, right? Like you don't have to be a graphic designer to be able to make it better. Just find a Google template that looks nice, just apply that to your thing, and then it will just look way better, way more professional. I think that people need to get I think that probably one of the biggest things I've noticed with, and this isn't EA specific, I think, which is just anybody who's been taught how to write from school, which is most humans, is that like, you just have to like really write assuming that people are skimming. And do not assume that they have read your whole thing and that they're like reading it from start to finish or anything like that. And so just like super heavily use like bullet points. The headers matter so much. People waste the headers. They'll say, for the header, they'll be like summary. Don't write summary, write the summary in the header for the summary, and then write the smaller, like the bigger summary, right? Like the headers are super, super important for all throughout. That's like mostly what people are going to be reading. And you really want to spend a whole bunch of time on those, not on the rest of it. Lots of bullet points. You can just do like really simple things like pulling out like really important text and put it in a little like square. Like on Google Docs, you just make a single cell table and make the background a different color, right? And then all of a sudden you've got like this thing that's like popping out. People will really see it and will really read it. What were other things? Making like titles catchier. Especially also the one sentence description, like there's basically, oh, hey, like what's your like quick summary, right? That is the thing that the funders will see, right? While they're scrolling through stuff. And if they don't like the summary, they will not read the rest of your thing. And so it's way more important than pretty much anything else you write, because if you get that thing wrong, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it is. So that's like definitely a thing that people could do better at. I think, what are other things? If you are doing something technical, this is hard, right? But like really try and make it understandable to somebody who is not a technical person. right? Because there's just tons, for every one technical funder, there's going to be like a million non-technical funders. And if you stand out of the crowd for being like, oh, hey, they actually understand what it is you're trying to do. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, like what are other things that are good for fundraising? Oh, I mean, an important thing is, so obviously we're trying to make it so that you can just apply once and then you don't have to keep applying to things because like, there's all these funders here. But definitely like just keep applying to other funders as well. Don't just apply to one thing and then wait. And then if you hear back negatively, then try the next one. Because like for one, that's just going to take a while and you might run out of funding in the meantime, right? Especially given tons of funders take forever to get back to you, right? So that's just not good. And that also gives you the benefit as well of, especially with EA donors, often they'll say, oh, hey, did you apply to OpenPhil or whatever? And what did they say, right? And if you can say, I haven't heard back yet, that's way better than I heard back and got a no, right? So there's like also that benefit. So definitely be applying to like lots. I know it's not super fun, but the way I look at fundraising that has made it much better for me is that when I write fundraising docs, it's almost like a gratitude list. I'm like, oh, I'm like, look at all the cool things I did last year. And then it's like a future gratitude list. It's like an anticipation. You're like, here are all the cool things I'm going to do next year. And that just makes it like actually kind of like fun and engaging and stuff. And just get practice at receiving no's, which is just really good. I mean, it's not pleasant at the beginning, but then afterwards it's great. You're just like way more free and like a happier person. And you get to raise more money, which means you get to do the thing that you actually think is highest impact, which is the best. So there's that. I mean, a lot of times I would just say, so I actually have a fundraising doc. It's hard for me to link it here. I'll send it to you guys after the call. I just have like my fundraising advice. I have my doc of 80-20 fundraising advice. It's got some links to some articles I found like the most helpful in terms of writing. It's like just made it like, oh yeah, like I get like these are like the important things to lead with. What are other things? Really make it clear what the theory of change is. Like a lot of people are just, oh, hey, I'm trying to like, I don't know, like count the number of rats in Ireland. And you're like, why? It's like, and like sometimes it turns out that there's actually like this really cool theory of change. And actually this totally makes sense. But like people will not get that by default. Yeah, what other things? I think one thing that I don't see as often as should happen is, and I think this is again just because like people are assuming, oh, they're EA donors. And so they're like just perfect, like computing rational machines. And as much as I would love to be one of those, we are currently not. We're still monkeys. And so one really quick way to get like a lot of credibility in terms of somebody wants to give to you is to say, who is like the most impressive person who you could say, hey, this person thinks I'm like doing a good job, right? Or whatever, right? Especially like in the like AI safety community, I feel like there's a lot of, and I don't condone this. I actually think this is very irritating, but this is definitely the case where it's a trust culture where you have to like know the people or whatever. And so if you can show that you know somebody and they can like vouch for you or whatever, that's going to go like a really long way. And especially also given the fact that evaluating technical applications is like really hard. Like you don't really know, like how, like it's really hard. So even if you're a technical person, if you know that another really smart technical person says that this person is doing a good job, that's going to make a big difference to you. Yeah. I think one thing that people probably underestimate is that how beneficial it is if you can be frugal. I think a lot of people are like, oh, hey, we need to like get paid a ton. And like, obviously lots of people, everybody has different life circumstances. And some people like you do need to get paid a lot. But if you can afford to be frugal, like I've definitely had a lot of people get funding because they were just like able to live off of like way less. And so they were just like, oh yeah, like I don't care. Like I just need enough so that I can survive and like, work on saving the world and stuff. And they're just way more easy to get funding because you're like, oh, well, I mean, I don't know, but they're only asking for a small amount of money. That seems fine, right? So that definitely helps a lot for sure. Yeah. I don't know. There's probably a lot more
already.
Yeah.
That is already a lot. Yeah, I certainly also found it some people gave a range and like when they also like then explained their range a bit. I think that's really important too. And did you get any like useful feedback from funders or something, like any learnings there when you did your feedback session with them?
Yeah, let me actually find out. I have a whole document. So much feedback. So much feedback. So I think like one of the biggest things that we realized is I have, hey, more options the better, because then you can pick like the thing that's the best, right? That you can only do as well as the best option that you're considering. But I got from like almost all funders that like the amount of applications was totally overwhelming. And so we're going to work on setting up stuff where I still want people to have access to everything. So I think that's like an important, again, I don't want it to be based off of Kat's values and worldview. I want like smart, my model is get a whole bunch of smart values aligned people working on stuff. And that leads to like good things happening. And it doesn't have to be like exactly what I think is good. And so like still have access, but then have some sort of like the first thing you see is like more of a smaller list or something. And then you can click into like more stuff. And what are other things? we have maybe it's ideas for the nonlinear network. Aha, here it is. Yeah, so having more curated lists. There's a bunch of like random bugs that we have to figure out. Man, it's like hard to get past people's spam filters. This is definitely a thing to figure out. Like we're working on it.
I know that from hosting all of these groups, like this group and like this group in all of our other different focus areas, I always land in spam because I send so many groups to like Google mailing lists of 300, 400 people.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
Right. Yeah. So the other thing I definitely learned is like, man, it's really hard to communicate en masse. There's just definitely like a lot of things where it's, man, like I thought like we put this in like, big bold letters in a whole bunch of places and people still missed it. So just really getting that's like a thing. What were other things? Oh, so people loved the comments. We had some reviewers. This is like a super last minute thing where we're like, oh yeah, we should totally have some sort of like way to like people can go like evaluate applications and stuff. And we had a few people like review applications and write comments and stuff. And that was just like super helpful for a lot of people apparently. And so we're definitely like wanting to do like a more intensive version of that, have more like carefully selected reviewers, have like more all sorts of stuff. So that could be cool. What else is there? One idea this idea keeps coming up is we want to set up like a prediction market for what things will get donated to. And so that could be really cool. Yeah. To say the donation circles. Yeah. I mean, there's like a whole bunch of like much more just like nitty gritty details of like how to set up a Slack properly and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's been a lot.
Well, yeah, it has been a lot. That must have been a lot of coordination. I still have a few more questions, but I already know that there's a few already in the chat. So maybe we'll start with a few of those and then I'll jump back in again. And maybe David, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, always happy to talk. So I was just wondering about what the funders were like. I understand that there were a bunch of different funders, but were there funders that were interested in some specific subset of like only grants for under $50,000 or only grants that worked on interpretability or only grants that worked on policy? Were there people who were trying to focus on more specific things in that sense?
Oh yeah. I feel like everybody just had a very different approach, right? And like some people are like only like interpretability or whatever. It was quite varied.
You had a few other questions, David. I don't know if you want to ask them too, or
I mean, I can do this all day. Yeah, no, I was wondering if you knew the numbers on what the average grant size like that was granted or the median grant size applied for and like how much total was granted and how much total was applied for. Just
good questions. So we're still figuring out how much people were actually giving because we've been having a lot of trouble getting people to actually respond and stuff. And we're finding all these like people coming out of the cracks and stuff. So that's good though. I can pretty easily find like so it's looking like the median donation that we saw was like just like that people have reported essentially is like 1,500. So pretty small. And then I don't know if the averages will be harder to like, but I'm eyeballing this as probably $10,000 or something. And so it's basically the usual where there's like this like big power law where there's a bunch of like small things and then there's a few really big, like much bigger donations.
And sorry, and like how much total did people ask for like in the range or how many applicants were there? How much total was asked for?
So I don't have an easy number for how much people asked for. I mean, also just varied a lot because there's the median, like there's what their like middle amount versus like their total amount. I'm guessing the total amount was like massive just because there's like a lot of people who are like, there's some people who are like trying to raise for like $10 million or something, right? And so that's just going to add it up a lot. What was our thing? And how
many people applied?
What was the other question? How many people applied?
Like how many people asked for funding or how many groups?
Yeah, so around 450 people applied. And I think it might have been more than that, but we like cut out, there's like a whole bunch of like spam stuff, but I think it was like 450 like actual applications.
Are you aware of anybody that's working on using AI agents or an AI model to coordinate between all of the different entities? Because I'm sure there's tons of duplication of effort and wasted resources. And an AI model, if you could train it or store all of the current research and what every different person is working on in a vector database store, and then have it interact and update the different organizations on what other people are working on and like work as some kind of coordinating entity, I think that could potentially produce greater progress per dollar spent.
Yeah. I haven't heard of anybody doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if there was, but that was just making me think that I bet that there's some sort of way that we can make it so it's way easier to search through applications, like with some sort of AI searchy something. But anyways, random idea. I'll add it to the giant list of random ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll happen.
Thank you.
Next one up, we have
Yeah.
Steve.
Just really quick. The reason why you can't do it with fiat is because of anti-money laundering laws. Like handing a bunch of people money to aggregate it up to hand it to somebody else is going to make banks very unhappy. Anyway.
Same if it's donations. Okay, I'm getting a nod here. Okay, cool. Steve, I'm wondering, you're up next.
Oh, hi. I'm really excited about what you're doing. I think it's great. I was a recommender with the SF, the Survival and Flourishing Fund that Jan Tallinn does in the first half of this year. And they use a process called S process, where each recommender not only says yes or no for each thing, but they give what their estimated value for the first dollar to a given group, and then how that curve varies, how the value goes down per dollar as you increase it. And the great thing about that is it automatically chooses how much. You have the question of how much to give to each group and how to balance them all. And then how do you balance between the different recommenders? So their system is really nice for that. I was wondering if you did anything similar or you were thinking in those ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a thing that one of the funders had the idea. They're like, oh, I'd like to have an S process for buying time interventions. And I think this is great. Like the only reason we didn't do it this round is we didn't have like enough capacity. We're just still building like the basic structure. But I really want there to be an S process for everything. I want there to be like an S process for all the different cause areas where you can also pick who your reviewers are and stuff like that. Yeah, I feel like I'm such a fan of the S process. We should definitely just have that for a lot of things.
Great.
Okay, cool. Well, I still have a few questions. For example, one, the focus areas that you already did, where you were able to kind of choose between. I know that you already had a kind of option of also putting in other or like a different category than the ones that you had proposed. But could you perhaps just like review or give a few example focus areas of what you focused on that you were particularly like excited about, or where you thought the applications were particularly good in? And maybe if you're adding a few, or how you're thinking about like how the focus area choice in particular went.
Yeah, at least for me, the areas that I'm most excited about, I'm super excited about buying time. I think that it's just really good on a lot of levels because, well, for one thing, I don't know, like we just might not have enough time. And so it just seems really good to get more of that. It's also like super neglected in terms of like intervention points because like up until recently, it just hasn't been in like the Overton window. And like finally that's changed. So there's just basically like tons of utility just lying around waiting for somebody to pick it up. So I'm really excited about that. And then also another benefit of buying time is that it's a multiplier across like all research. So if you get another year for researchers, it's not just getting another year for the average researcher, it's also getting another year for the best researchers. I don't know who these are, but it does give it to them, right? And so it's like this one of those things that it captures like the extreme upside of the best without us having to actually be able to identify who those people are, which I really like. And and I was just talking to somebody earlier today. He's a guy running Stot.ai at Conjecture. And he was saying he's asked a whole bunch of like researchers, okay, imagine that you have like infinite dollars. You basically have a budget of $2 billion a year. You can hire as many people as you want. Like, how long do you think it will take you to solve alignment? And like almost nobody gives like an answer that's less than like 20 years. And you're like, ooh, it's not great. So I'm really excited about those sorts of things. I also think it's like much easier to slow things down than maybe it is to speed up alignment, just because just like slowing things down, we're great at that. Like usually this is a bad thing. Usually like slowing down technological progress is bad. But the fact that we're so good at it is actually good in this case. I feel like almost any regulation you throw at it will slow it down. Like it's just, that's the default. It's just like regulation, like that's like the default response. So that's fantastic. And obviously there's actually much more like tactical things you can do that would be much better than just like random regulation. But it feels like the downside is like less bad. So really excited about that. I'm really excited about seeing people starting new organizations. I think right now like we have this like massive funnel of new people coming in. They're getting trained up. Like the middle of the funnel is like pretty good. And then the end of the funnel is like most people need a job. Like they can't just start something. But there's only so many jobs. Like the jobs is like super small. So like I really want people to be starting things. If you can start an organization, it's really good too, because then you can just increase the amount of people that we can absorb who are actually like doing things like that are useful. Or if you're already running an organization, like work on like scaling faster. I think those are like the big things. So that's like things I'm excited about in terms of cause areas. I don't really understand the technical stuff. My strategy is just get more people like that are really smart and aligned working on things. And if I get enough of them and they're like quality us, obviously don't just recruit like the homeless off the street or something, but get more people. And then, so yeah, but I don't have a strong sense of what particular technical approaches seem better.
And were there any specific focus area that you had more or less applications in that you expected or something? Was there like one that was kind of like totally blown out of the water, or one where you're like, oh, this is pretty popular, but then you didn't really get many in it?
Interesting question. Nothing really popped out, but I'm sure there was stuff there. I'm just like quickly looking at it now. I guess I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that there's so few that in the China relations, great power conflict stuff, just because it's like for them, it's like harder to get international donations. Like obviously that's going to be like a lot more like tricky. So if there's that, nothing really stood out.
Yeah, I think that David also posted the governance archives link just here in the chat. And I think it's interesting because I think governance definitely was something that was discussed a lot, let's say even 5-6 years ago at EAGs and so forth. And we used to do these AI coordination and policy and governance kind of like workshops after EAG. And then it looked like that field was really like, there was a lot of like work in it. And I think that there actually is a lot of work in it, but it's also just now so pressing and urgent and so many things on fire. And it just become very real suddenly from this more abstract thing to think about to a really real thing where people are acting in the world and there is need for coordination. And so I think, yeah, it's just like an area that kind of has exploded because it's obviously like the first one really that we'll get into. And I think it's also the one that could potentially beneficially like impact the other areas. If we're a little bit better at the kind of like coordination game, then we could buy more time for safety, security, whatever you may have. So it's definitely an interesting one that's currently could still use a little bit of help.
Definitely.
Okay, so you may do a next one of this one. Do you have any other projects apart from the kind of like nonlinear network that you have in the works at Nonlinear? I mean, I know that you do the podcast and that's always pretty much up to date, but are you working on any other bits and pieces there?
Yeah. So I'm right now, like my big thing that I'm working on is just like doing more of like the prioritization work to find like the things that I want to. Still figuring out the best way to catalyze them. That'll probably be some mix of basically just promoting the idea and then plus putting up like RFPs. So saying, oh, hey, or like prizes of saying, hey, if you're the right team or something, I will give you like the first like X amount of dollars or something. And for that, I have a thing that I could share. Anybody who is interested, I don't know how to do this, but I'm calling it the Catalyst. It's like a cat with a K and an I instead of a Y for my list of things that I want to catalyze. Very happy with this name. And it's like a semi-prioritized list of about like over 400 ideas, I think, on it. Ideas to start in AI safety. And it's semi-prioritized by me looking at it and being like, okay, how excited would I be to help somebody start this? Like in terms of like providing like mentorship or introductions or potentially seed funding. And so I'm working on that and making it like more prioritized and better and stuff. But I'm also happy to share with anybody on this like channel now. It's like still like an internal document. So don't share it and like keep in mind in terms of like how polished it is. But just like working on a lot of that and yeah, just trying to make it. Because like I feel like right now, if you're like an entrepreneur, you're told like, okay, AI safety is the most important thing. Don't mess anything up. It's kind of like that vibe that comes up, right? Like, what do I do now? I don't know. I'm not supposed to mess things up. It's very complicated. And so I want to have this, hey, these are like pretty vetted ideas of like things that should be started. And so I'm excited about that. I do coaching and career advice for people who are considering starting something in AI safety. So the career coaching is specifically for people who are considering starting something in AI safety. Can't just be like regular jobs. Although I do often recommend that people just go get regular jobs. It's not like I just say, oh, hey, you should definitely just start something. Oh, hey, if that's one of your options you're considering, I can talk to you about it and give advice on like how to pick something. And I offer ongoing coaching for people who have already started something or in the beginning of starting something. I give like advice along the way, which is just the best, right? This is so much fun. And I get to talk to entrepreneurial EAs who turn out to be my favorite sort of people. So
yeah, that's true. I think the list that you mentioned is actually really interesting because I think one thing that we often have, not only in this group, but across our different technical tracks, is like there is always like a coordination that needs to happen between an idea, a person who can execute the idea, and someone who can fund the idea. It's like this kind of weird triangle, and someone may have one thing, but it's not the person that will execute it, but that could maybe be advising them. And someone has the money, but doesn't really know what to fund, and then needs to either find the person that can execute something or the person with the idea. And it is difficult. Like it needs to happen like these three ways and not always the same person. And I think often like they get together at workshops. I usually good like a catalyzer for us to like actually connect these people. But if there was a more asynchronous process, I think, in which one could do that, that would be really good. Like a three-way matchmaking rather than just like a two-way matchmaking. Like even people with an idea that could get someone else to do that idea and someone else to fund that idea or something, that would be really cool.
Yeah. And another thing too, actually, that I'm like tentatively, I put 50% chance this is going to happen, is taking the list and just like sharing it with a bunch of funders I know and saying, hey, just go through this and indicate anyone that like, if the right team started it, you'd be excited to fund them. This is like a cool idea, conditional on it being the right team, you'd be excited to fund it. And then what you have is like, not only just prioritize that what Kat would like to help, it's, oh, hey, you could actually sort by, oh, hey, there's like this funder, like what are the things they're excited to fund? And that's like another way to like help filter a little bit.
And then applicants can apply to do that thing and funders can squeeze in the back. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, David, you have another question.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to see the list, but what proportion of the things on the list are things that you don't want the wrong person doing, as opposed to things where you do want the right person doing? Because there are a lot of ideas where it'd be great if somebody did this, but if it's the wrong person, then it's like really bad. Versus ideas where, no, anybody take this and run. If you can figure out how to do this type of interpretability, like if you fail, then you failed, then it doesn't matter. And if you didn't, then it's fantastic. As opposed to build an org that like coordinates with, or if you do it badly, then it poisons the water. Like what's the distribution there?
Yeah, what percentage? So I actually think that like most of the time, like I think and this is like more of a general role model for me, as opposed to necessarily about the ideas. Other people might disagree, but I tend to think that like most things are like self-correcting. Like most of the stuff that we do, like most of the idea, if the person does a bad job, they'll just have trouble fundraising and it will fail. And then somebody else will do it. And we really need to push back against the whole idea that has somehow percolated in EA that if somebody's done it and they failed, that must mean the idea is bad. And you're like, no. Like, this is just incorrect. There are so many reasons the thing can fail. And also promote competition of being like, oh, hey, just because there's AI safety camp doesn't mean we shouldn't have like Sari Mats and everything else, right? Obviously, like just have a bunch of different things. So, yeah, and I'm more like, I think, yeah, like there's going to be, like, there's all sorts of filters. So maybe if I think that this idea is not that dangerous, right? But like most of the funders do, then it just won't get funded, right? There's many points where it's much harder for a charity to succeed in spite of itself than it is to fail for a million reasons that aren't even necessarily relevant. So yeah, so I'm less worried about that for most things. There are some ideas that I have that I put in like a private section that I don't share with anybody where I'm like, like this is, and I think I'll have some sort of thing. Like if I do have as this grows and everything, I might add like a section where I'm like, oh, hey, like this is like much more of a sensitive thing. So don't start it. Or another thing I can do to make it so that only like the people that at least I think are good start it is I can always just add, I think like a really easy way to do it is just add an RFP where I say, hey, I will give funding to somebody who's starting this, who like I think is a good team. And then like I just can provide the filter. And like weirdly, less people will start it then if I don't give them the money than if there was like all these ideas where I never even offered money, right? Because they'll be like, oh, but like I didn't get accepted. It must mean I'm bad, right? And this is an idea I'm trying to push against in the EA movement. But in this case, it will actually be good for me, I guess, according to my values. So
we have a few more questions from the chat. Maybe I can just funnel them in. One of them was, what, like in general, just are there specific funders interested in funding projects with particularly short AI timelines? And I think this could be also like relatively like general questions. Like, I think it would have been helpful to have a section where people can give their rough AI timeline estimates, because I think that actually does, like, on what of a timeline does this project like roughly work? And I know that it's really difficult to tell, but did you have any kind of like timeline related insights as you kind of like went through the metadata of all of these projects?
I can't think of any, but that's a good idea. I do like the idea of making just like a default that you have, like one of the questions you can answer is, like under what timelines is this useful?
Yeah. Okay. And then the other one that we had in the chat is like, how does Nonlinear track progress? What would be considered a win by the end of this year?
Well, it just really depends on each of the individual, like since we had such a wide variety of projects and stuff, I mean, there's a couple that I can't say because of info hazard, but I'm like, man, like this is just like all of my impact for last year is like this thing. And that's like a totally different thing. Like one basically like an outreach thing that just had a lot of effects. And then that's going to have a very different thing than like how I evaluate the Nonlinear network compared to like how I evaluate the Nonlinear library versus like EA houses. Like it's just so all over the place. My general practice is I used to be like super hardcore on measure everything, like just quantify the fuck out of everything. And I still am like that for some things, but I've come out on the other side where I'm like, like even like quantifying things gives you like a false sense of security that you feel like you've like quantified stuff. Like I'm really deeply uncertain about whether AMF is net positive. And it's AMF. It's like the most like studied thing ever. It's so measured, but but there's all these like potential flow-through effects that I think are like potentially quite bad. And I think with AI, it's just, oh man, like we're just like, wait, like I worked in a field that had enough feedback loops to know how mostly bullshit feedback loops are. And so like my current strategy is mostly just, I have a ton of at-bats. And if I have enough at-bats, one of them is like much more likely to work. And so anyways, but I don't necessarily recommend this to people who have a more like specific strategy, because then of course then it's easier to measure because you're at least focusing on the same thing for a long period of time. But yeah.
I think even that spray and pray methodology, like nonlinear network was one of the things that came out of it. I think it's already pretty good. And just as someone who was using it, really liked it. Last question, because we're at time. If people in this group are excited about your work, especially like with nonlinear, what can they do to help? What are a few things that you guys are looking to help with? Could be anything. Really.
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously donating on the network is great. Try to think of other things. So hooking me up, like one of my biggest things right now is I'm realizing, so one of the things that where I was saying like, that was like most of my impact for last year was basically, I'm going to try to say in the most general way possible. But basically I like interacted with somebody who was like really like exceptional human being, who's like really deeply competent and capable. And I was able to like get them to work on AI safety. And that was like amazing. And I realized I'm like, man, okay, so if you know somebody who's like really entrepreneurial, who like wants to help in AI safety, but doesn't know what to do, like sending them my way is like fantastic. I think I'm like also like quite well connected. So I tend to like, it's often like I'll just talk to them once and then I'll send them to like all these people that I know would be good to talk to and everything. And so like that would be fantastic in terms of, so I'm especially like the thing I'm especially looking for right now is I'm really looking to have a like 1,000x activist to work on like buying us time. I think right now, like there's a whole bunch of EAs who are trying to like figure out like, how do we like slow things down? And like, we're like, this is not our skill area. This is not the thing that we are great at. And I think that if we just found one of those like people who's already done tons of activism, like they know how to do these things, like they're really fantastic and they're already interested in AI safety. And if we're able to just empower them, get the right things to happen so they're like able to do that, like I think that could be like incredible. So if you have any connections or anything like that would be fantastic. Or just generally any entrepreneurs, like my favorite is like somebody who's like just finished, like they've just exited or like they just stepped back from the previous charity. It doesn't have to be a for-profit, could be a nonprofit startup. And they're like figuring out what to do next. Like one of my main things is doing prioritization research and trying to figure out like where are there gaps in the market of AI safety. So sending people that my way would be awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And you can keep
that's a good laundry list. That's pretty that's pretty actionable.
Yeah. And you can keep like track of what I'm doing if you just follow me on Facebook or Twitter. That's like where I spend a lot of time like sharing my ideas and stuff and what we're up to and everything. So that's like the best way. Technically, we have a newsletter. I never really use it. So
okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited for the next round. And thanks a lot for all the coordination work that you did. I think many people have talked about wanting something like this or even like wanting to do something like this. And then you just went ahead and did it. And it was definitely really useful for, I think, many people that I've spoken to. So thanks a ton for their work. Thanks everyone for your great questions. And I hope to see you all at the next one. Bye-bye.